We are just a few steps away of having a complete working application. And in fact, as far as the front end is concerned, we are almost done. All we need to do is add the ability for users to search our glossary. Now, when I say front end, I'm not really referring to what is in the browser. I know that that's typically what you might think of, but whenever we are working with solely a server application, we have a front end, which is what the average user sees, and then we have the back end, which is all of the admin stuff. So in this case, we are almost done with all of the stuff that an average user is going to see. So we are going to add a form to our index view because that is the most logical place for the user to search our glossary. And then we will just go from there. So let's add another row here. And this is where we are going to put our form. And this is going to be an inline form. So we'll have a class of form-inline. I believe that's what the class is. We'll find out soon enough. Now, as far as the action is concerned, we are inside of index.view.php. However, whenever we see this in the browser, it is going to be index.php. So we will be able to leave this alone. However, if you wanted to be absolutely explicit and say that we're going to index.php, then feel free to do so. There's no harm in making sure that things are going to work how you expect them to. But I'm going to leave that, and we are going to make this a GET request because we aren't dealing with any sensitive information and we aren't changing the state of our application. We are just essentially requesting data. So I'm going to use GET. Let's have a form group that is going to contain our text box as well as the submit button. So we'll start with the text box. Let's give this a name of search, because remember, whatever we specify as the name, that is what is going to end up in the URL. So we want something that is at least readable, and search just kind of makes sense. So we will have a name and ID of search, and really that's it as far as our text box is concerned. So let's add another input element. This will be type submit, or you can use a button. I'm just using an input out of habit. And as far as the value, this is going to be simply search. So if we view this in the browser, we should see our form, and there it is. Although we might want to style it so that it's over on the right-hand side, but this is going to be sufficient. Okay, so we have our form. Now we just need to write the code inside of our index controller. So we are going to make our nice and very clean controller be a little dirty, but that's okay. We're not going to do anything that is out of the ordinary or anything that would be inappropriate. So the first thing we want to do is check to see if we have a search term in the URL. So we will use isSet. We will specify our get superglobal and then search. If we have this, then we want to perform a search. So let's create a variable called items. And we will call a function called search_terms. And then we will pass in what was given to us through the URL. Now, I want you to notice the name of this function, search terms. I called it this because our other function is called get terms. If we are consistent in our naming, it makes it easier in the long run to work on our applications. So always be mindful of what you have named things in the past, because if you keep it consistent, then everything's all good. So if we don't have a search term in the URL, then we can just do what we normally do and get all of our terms to display in our view. So then we will pass our items to our view and we should be fine there. So now we just need to write this search terms. And we have our file functions inside of the file called file functions under app and data. And we already have a function called getTerm. And on the surface, it would seem like that we could use that. But remember that what this function does is it loops over all of our items. And if there is a matching term, then it just returns that item. It doesn't search the rest of the array for any other matches. If it finds a match, it returns it, and then it's done. So at the most, getTerm just returns a single item. Whereas whenever we are searching for something, well, we could return 0 items or 1 item or multiple items. So let's call this search term, or let's just call it search, because I'm going to probably say the term many times. So we have our search, and the first thing we want to do is get all of our terms. So let's just do that. We'll say items equals, and then get terms. And then we want to loop over our items so that we can search each of the terms with what was provided to the function. And we can also search the definitions, and that would actually be good. That way they can search for anything, and we will return anything that was a hit. That means that we need to loop over our array, and we need to build a new array that contains the matches. Now that kind of sounds like something that we have already used before. If you'll remember, many lessons ago, we used a function called arrayMap, and it accepts a callback function, and it executes that function on every item within our array. And that sounds great, except that it doesn't filter the array. If we have an original array with 3 items, the resulting array is going to have 3 items. There's nothing that we can do about that. However, there is another function called arrayFilter. Now, there are many array functions, just let me throw that out there, but we have arrayFilter, which will allow us to filter our array. And that's exactly what we want, except that there's a slight little problem. The developers of PHP were not consistent. Now, I don't mean to beat you over the head with be consistent, be consistent, be consistent, but this is why you need to be consistent. Here we have 2 functions that work with arrays. We have arrayMap and we have arrayFilter. And they accept the same information. ArrayMap takes a function and then an array, but arrayFilter takes array and then function. There's no reason for these to be switched. None whatsoever. And this puts the burden on us. We have to remember which function has which parameter list order. At the very least, if we get it wrong, we have to go back and we have to fix it. And you might think that, well, that's not that big of a deal. But whenever you start working with other languages and other platforms, it is a big deal because other developer teams, they put forth the effort to be consistent. So be consistent. Put the burden on you to be consistent. Otherwise, you're going to tick off the people that are going to be working with you or working with your code. And that's all I'm going to say about that, at least for right now. So we want to pass in our array first, and then our function. And then inside of the function, we are going to perform our search. But how do we do a search? Well, let's look at this. We have a string. This is called hello world. And a string is nothing really more than an array of characters. So you can think of this as every character as an item in an array. So H is at position 0, E is at position 1, L is at position 2, the other L is at position 3, and so on and so forth. Now, when it comes to PHP, all of our functions return a position of a character. So we have a function called string position, or strpos, but it's short for string position. And it allows us to search a string for what's called a substring. The substring is just a smaller part of a larger string. So we have hello world as our string, and they use the term searching for a needle in a haystack. So hello world is our haystack, and then let's say that we have ELLO as our needle. That's our search term. So the string position function is going to return the position of where it finds the match for the needle, or our search term. So in this case, it's going to return the position of 1, because ELLO begins at position 1. So that's what we get. Now, if we do a search for HE, then that's going to return the position of 0, because the first match of HE is at position 0, HE, and then LLO. So in this case, that's position 0. However, if we do a search for Z, well, there is no Z in hello world. So in that case, it returns false. So we can use this string position function to determine if we have a match with our search term. So it will look like this. We will have an if statement. If string position, our haystack is the term property for our item. The needle is our search term. And if this is not equal to false, then we have a match, although we do need a use statement here. Remember that inside of our anonymous function, we can use our search variable, but we have to explicitly say that we want to use it. So we will use search. And so if we have a match, if string position returns, or does not return false, I should say, we return our item. Okay, so makes sense, right? Let's go and let's check it out. So we are going to do a search for C. Click on search and we got nothing at all. We should have 1 because of CSS. So here's the thing. Whenever we talked about conditions, I left something out. We have true and false, which we definitely talked about, but we also have something called truthy and falsy. These are values that are not true and false, but they can be used as true and false. Now, if you'll remember whenever we talked about conditions and we echoed out true, we saw that we used, or that PHP echoed out the value of 1. Well, 1 is a truthy value, and really, anything that is not 0 is truthy. It's just that 1 is the most common, so 1 it is. A string that contains anything is truthy. An array that contains anything is truthy. So there are many values that could be considered true. So we could do something like this. We could say if 1 echo, something out, and we would see that in the browser. We could also echo, or we can also do if, and then have the string, and we would still see the echo statement. However, if we did something like this, where it was an empty string, well, we would not see the echo statement. If we said if 0, we would not see an echo statement. But now let's do this. We have string position. We had our term, which was CSS, and then we had our search, which was C. Well, C is at the position 0 in CSS. So what we ended up with was this. 0 is not equal to false. Well, 0 is a falsy value. So what we ended up with was really false is not equal to false. Well, that's not true. That is false. So therefore, our code, the return statement, did not execute. So then how do we make this work? Well, we have another equality operator. It is 3 equal signs, and this is a strict equality check. In this case, it's going to see the value of 0 and the value of false. They are not equal in this case. So this condition is false. However, if we say not, and then 2 equal signs, then this condition is true, because the value of 0 is definitely not equal to false. So when it comes to doing equality checks and inequality checks, most of the time, you want to be strict about it. So in this case, we need to be strict because the string position function will return a positive value or 0 or false. If 0 and false could be the same thing, then we need to have an absolute strict check to make sure that what is returned by string position is not false. So that is why that didn't work before. If we go back and we do a search for C, now we will see our results because CSS is there. Okay, so we did a search based upon the term, but we also want to do a search based upon the definition as well. So this is going to be an or. If the term contains our search, or if the definition contains our search, then we want to include that item within our filtered array. So we will have definition, that's our haystack, our needle is search, and this is of course not going to be false either, then return. Now notice that I put this on 2 lines. You can do that. I just did it for readability purposes. If you wanted to put it all on one line, that's great, but I don't like to horizontally scroll. And if you do, well then I'm sorry. So there we go. Now we should see just, well, everything, because everything, well, yeah, everything has a C. I'm sorry. So if we do a search for CSS, we see CSS. If we do a search for CA, we still see CSS because cascading has CA. But let's do a search for AS. We should get cascading style sheets as well as JavaScript because that string is in both of those definitions. So it would be nice if our heading up here also included our search term. So we can do that with our view bag. Let's add another item here called heading. And we can do this. We will set the default to glossary. And then if we do have a search term, then we will say view bag and heading, and we will set that to equal to search results for, and we could wrap this around with quotes, but let's just do this. We'll concatenate our search terms. So we will have that. And inside of our view, we need to get rid of that, and we need to output our new heading in the view bag. So view bag, and then heading. And now we have some indication that there is something other than the glossary there. So we have the search results for AS. If we did a search for Z, then of course there's nothing there. Okay, so we have our front end complete. We can click on any of the items in order to view the details. We, of course, see all of our items, and we can search for our items. Well, that means that in the next lesson, we get to start with the admin portion of our application. That is where we are going to add and update items within our data store, and we might do some deletion too, as well.